So I'm very happy to be talking to Batu Kutelia. He is a citizen of the Republic of Georgia, who's now living in Washington, D.C. Batu was the ambassador of Georgia to the United States, as well as Canada and Mexico. He was a former Georgian defense official responsible for intelligence, and he has a long background in U.S.-Georgian relations. Now, Georgia is a small country on the Black Sea. Many Americans are probably not aware of its location or its importance, but I think that, in fact, under the current circumstances, and particularly since the outbreak of the full-scale war in Ukraine, it is playing a very important role that will be a bellwether for the whole region. So, Batu, welcome. Why don't you talk a little bit about why Americans should care about Georgia, given its position and the strategic importance of, of that part of Eurasia in general.
Thank you, Frank, for this opportunity to talk to you and to audience. And you are right, Georgia is a small country, and maybe to many Americans it might confuse it as a state of Georgia, but there are specific segments in American society or professional circles who really know Georgia very well. And particularly these are U.S. Marine Corps, because Georgia has been one of the biggest troop contributors for the American missions in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we've been trained and deployed with U.S. Marine Corps, and we significantly contributed to the success of the mission that Americans had in any particular deployment and operation. So if you ask any American Marines from top general to the down soldier, they definitely know where Georgia is and how good of Georgia is a partner of the United States when it comes to the U.S. Security interests. On the other hand, for every Georgian knows America very well, and not only knows America very well, but every Georgian can confirm that America was, frankly to say, the only country who saved Georgia's statehood, who believed in Georgia's independence even during the Soviet occupation. If you go in the congressional archives and see the Congress reports of 20th century 1950s, there is a report that clearly says that American believes that Georgians will never give up their sovereignty and independence. It's a matter of time for to regain them, and it came true. And that type of, moral and pragmatic bonds really makes Georgia a unique country for America in the region as a most pro-American country. But besides that type of, emotional bonds, there is a very important pragmatic component to it, especially nowadays when we are speaking about Russian-Chinese alliance and their interest to dominate several critical infrastructure and critical resources that are necessary for defense, security, economic green transformation, artificial intelligence, energy security. And these are critical minerals and rare earths which are in Central Asia, where Russia and China are tactically allied with each other and trying to have a grip. And the only
Maybe I'll in
yeah.
the video I'll try to put up a map of Georgia, but for those that are not aware, Georgia borders on the Black Sea in the Caucasus Mountains. It's a neighbor of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then Russia itself to the north. And it was a critical corridor for anybody that wanted to, let's say, invade from the north into Turkey or from the south north into what's now Russia. And so that's why I think, as you say, it does have this current strategic significance.
Exactly. And historically, that always have been the factor, even centuries ago and even last 2 centuries. And if we look and review the policy statements of last several US administrations, Democratic or Republic, everyone was admitting that Black Sea Caspian route, or so-called middle corridor, which we call it right now, is very important for US national security interests. And Georgia, in that regard, represents some kind of a gateway towards East. This narrow path that allows Western companies, Western institutions to have an access to that important resource and a big land mass, which also represents a key factor that contributed, for example, to the ability of Soviet Union to sustain itself because of richness, not only hydrocarbon resources, but other minerals, as well as food production and also access to farther east. For example, again, from the recent history, when US and NATO allied troops were deployed in Afghanistan and Russia tried to create problems for a logistical supply, which used to use Russian land supply lines, then Black Sea Caspian, or so-called the Northern Distribution Network South, became a vital axis to support logistically US militaries in Afghanistan. And for military purposes, that partnership really worked well. And then there was an idea that this, if it works for military purposes, it should have a commercial value. And especially now when everyone talks about the critical minerals, rare earth metals, that's the most untapped resources so far, where Russia has some grip, but because of the sanctions, they are losing this grip. But China is trying to substitute Russia in that regard. So Georgia as a gateway is a key factor that will allow US companies or Western companies jointly to access this area. But on the other hand, it's not only that type of pragmatic land bridge, but it also requires more bigger policy decisions. Some components of this policy decision, or admitting necessity for US strategic interest, we've seen last decade. For example, bipartisan bill that was adopted in Congress, in the last Congress, Black Sea Security Act, clearly indicates the importance of the Black Sea region for a number of purposes, but one of the primary purpose is as a foothold to have an access towards the east, to the Caspian and then Central Asian landmass.
Actually, Batu, maybe we should back up a little bit because I think a lot of the listeners may not know the recent history. So, Russia is your giant neighbor to the north, and in 2008, there was a war between Russia and Georgia, and Russia ended up occupying, what is it, 20% of the territory of
Yes.
Georgia. And so this was like a prelude to the invasion, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine that happened in 2022. And of course, Georgia had been part of the former Soviet Union and had gotten its independence after 1991. So this is an important contextual fact about Georgia's geopolitical situation.
Yes, thanks for mentioning it. It's very important contextual factor, not only because of Russia-Georgia relations or Russia's predatory interests against independent Georgia state as a phantom pain of Putin of dissolved Soviet Union. But in a bigger context, Georgia was the first victim of Putin's and Russia's aggressive revisionism, which he openly declared in 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, and then started implementing it because of the lack of strategic vision from the West and number of other factors. So Georgia was first country where Russia decided to use aggressive, coercive military means of its hybrid warfare and invaded and captured 20% of Georgian territory. And at that time, it was well anticipated that the next steps will follow somewhere else. And unfortunately, we were right, because then Crimea in 2014, annexation of Ukraine's Crimea in 2014, and full-scale invasion in 22 happened. So Georgia is part of this aggressive revisionism that Russia tries to exercise, let's say, to reverse engineer the existing world order to the point when it started after the Second World War, and then create a new type of world order based on the spheres of influence. And Black Sea, Caspian, or this belt, southern belt along the Russian border is considered by Russia as kind of quote unquote exclusive sphere of interest. And that's what Russia is trying to prove with its aggressive hybrid means of warfare against Ukraine, against Georgia, and also with its deployed network of political or economic influence in Central Asia. So that's why strategically, I think it's very important for the West to create that type of, and everyone speaks now about the red lines. Yeah, okay, what are the Russian red lines? What are Ukraine red lines? But I think we have to understand what are the red lines for us, the Western democratic civilization. Because if the fundamental rules will be obstructed by Russia, then we will end up in some kind of divided lines where big powers like China and Russia will have some kind of a territorial exclusive interest. Plus, of course, they will gain access to the very important resources, as I mentioned, on the Caspian and Central Asia. And on top of it, or a more fundamental idea or ideology level, they are also interested to prove that democracy will not be a successful political system in that part of the world. That's why Georgia was chosen as a first victim by Russia, because Georgia was the most promising democracy in so-called post-Soviet space.
Right. And the Russians have a number of instruments. So they have an army that's occupying parts of Georgia, but probably their more important source of influence is in Georgia itself, because they have deep ties to, certain individuals and groups in Georgia. So why don't you explain, that situation and the way that the Georgian domestic politics is manipulated by Moscow?
Yes, this context that we described indicates the importance of changing the trajectory of Georgia's democratic transformation for Russia and its aggressive revisionism. So they tried the military means. And as I said in the beginning, Georgians are predominantly more than 80% pro-Western, pro-American nation for all the data that or the public opinion polls we have so far. And notwithstanding this type of military aggression and capture of 20% of our territories, Russia was not able to change public opinion. Just the opposite. Georgians became more aligned to the West, and the only way to protect ourselves was viewed by a majority of Georgians to more integrate to the European and Euro-Atlantic structures. So that's why Russia decided to use the other means of influencing the public opinion, because simply land capture did not give them the results they desired. And then we've seen that through different hybrid means, which was a combination of corruption, kleptocracy, propaganda, and most importantly, Russian affiliated oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili, who was part of this Russian cohort of oligarchs who were behind the kleptocratic system in Russia. Russia started exporting this system abroad to undermine the public opinion and heavily finance the shift in the public opinion against the West. So they used a number of vehicles, but first of all, it was an economic and corruption. And of course, it was part of the political decision-making as well, reinforcing pro-Russian or ultra-right nationalistic sentiments in Georgian society. And they deployed this network in Georgia. Unfortunately, we've seen that with these efforts in the last 12 years, when current Georgian government is in power through several rigged elections with external assistance of Russia and resources that they gain from serving the Putin's purpose of bypassing existing sanctions. Georgian Dream and Bidzina Ivanishvili, what is the name of this Russian oligarch, they successfully managed to capture entire state. So when the land capture did not work, Russia decided to resort on the state capture. And unfortunately, again, because of number of the factors, even negligence from the West, inability to admit this strategic trajectory or influence or power of hybrid warfare by Russia, we ended up where we ended up right now. And that's why now we see last 4 months or more, Georgians are in the street protesting. Because again, Georgian public opinion still, fortunately, remains pro-Western. But
And those protests had begun last year, right, over the media bill or the NGO bill that was being pushed by Ivanishvili and his Russian backers.
Yes, that protest started when Ivanishvili, a Russian oligarch with the Georgian name, with the strong support of Putin and Russian special services that has been proved by the number of journalistic investigation, they decided to, first of all, to fundamentally rig the election, but before that also prepare so-called through this autocratic legalism, create a legal framework of banning any possibility of external financial support of civil society and their ability to mobilize around the values of democracy and the freedom. So to consolidate the grip on the power, and that was the ticking moment when Georgia Dream introduced the so-called the foreign agents law. That was a copy of the same law that Putin introduced in Russia and then slowly tightened the grip around civil society, political parties, and the free media. And then Georgians started protesting against it. This protest never went unnoticed, and we had quite a significant measures deployed by our Western partners, United States particularly as well, putting sanctions on Ivanishvili, his family members, his kleptocratic pyramid of enablers, and also European Union, particular European Union countries also joined, and recently we've seen the United Kingdom as well sanctioning those guys who would captured the state and who are trying to obstruct Georgia's democratic transformation in the interest of big Russia strategic interest. And again, it's not only about the 4 million Georgians who fight for about us who fight for our freedom, but I think there is a more bigger stakes in the game for Russia as well as for the West. For Russia, it's important to create some kind of a anti-access area denial zone. It's a military technology, but applies to the strategic political game here as well, to squeeze out West from this region, because that would allow Russia to exercise its strategy of having direct access to South, to Iran, to the Middle East, control the Black Sea. And one of the reasons of invading in Ukraine is also having the type of geopolitical advantage and then exercise it as a leverage over the European security. So Georgia is more than Georgia, as we say, but of course, one of the key components is pragmatic strategic interests of our Western allies, and particularly United States.
Right. And what do you expect to happen in the coming months? So the protests tried to block this anti-foreign foreigner bill. It wasn't successful. The bill is in place. Are you expecting to see the closure of different organizations that have been trying to resist Ivanishvili and the strangling of any kind of democratic opposition, news media sources, this sort of thing?
Yes, everything is going through the classical Kremlin playbook. So what we've seen in Russia since the Putin came in power, the same is happening in Georgia with the same exact sequence of the steps, maybe in a some bit accelerated manner. This acceleration happened after February 2022 when Russia invaded in Ukraine, because this gray zone of maneuverability for Ivanishvili disappeared. So it was a black and white. Either you are free democratic world or pro-Russian. So what will happen exactly what happened in Russia. We have now already political prisoners. Their number is increasing. And these people are in jail simply because they've been exercising their right, constitutional right of the freedom of the speech, standing and protesting on the streets or speaking against the government. And there is a tens of young protesters who are right now in prison, and they are political prisoners. They are there without just cause. But what we see is now that the coercive measures is increasing, and this is also the playbook of Russia. We will see, I think, more harsh coercive measures, more arrests, because we see already now they are tightening the legal norms as Putin did in Russia. So then they will apply this the designed by themselves or fabricated norms against the opponents. So we will see that trajectory. Whether it will be successful or not, that's a key question. Georgian people are protesting. This protest, of course, was driven by our interest to save our state from becoming a proxy or annex of Russia and the sovereignization attempt by Russia. But also this protest was supported by moral support from the West. Sanctioning of the individuals had a pragmatic interest, of course, punishing those who are responsible for arrest and brutality and beating up protesters, but it had a moral component as well, that we are not alone in that battle. So if we will see more coercive measures from the West deployed against ones who are responsible of this authoritarian turn and the brutality that we see right now, I think that the protest will not go away, and finally we will be able to turn Georgia back to the normal democratic path. Chances of it slowly decreasing because there are many other things happening in the region, and we can understand that there are distractions of different types in the region, starting most important one, the war in Ukraine, because I think Georgian problem is like a connected vessel is attached to the Ukraine. So if there will be success in Ukraine, Georgia will have more chances, and I strongly believe in it. But also there are other important factors. So that's why the purpose of our conversation or our contacts with the new American administration or in Europe is that, again, to repeat myself, Georgia is more than Georgia. There is more things at stake with Georgia.
Why
There
don't
is
you why don't you say a little bit about China, which has become an increasingly important player? So there's a Chinese port project that's part of the Belt and Road system. Um, how does that figure into the geopolitics of the Caucasus region?
Yes, that's a very important question. Besides Russia, who has its strategic interest that we touched upon extensively, there are other authoritarian players. China, which has a bigger interest of controlling Central Asia, Central Asian countries, where Russia is slowly squeezed out because of the sanctions and some other factors. And maybe in Central Asia, Russian and Chinese interests are in contradiction, but tactically they are aligning with each other, especially in Georgia and on the Black Sea, for different purposes, but both are interested that this gateway to the east will be banned for the West. And the primary reason why China got this deep sea port contract from Georgian government, I think, is linked to ability of China to control the access routes to the Central Asia. Russia has different purposes on the Black Sea to prevent Western engagement because Georgia is a pro-Western country, but for different reasons, but both are happy to have this strategic infrastructure, especially this deep sea port, under the Chinese control. That prevents Western interests to be projected farther east. And how this happened? Initially, this project was under the development of an nuclear consortium with the large participation of American companies. And even at that time, and it was around 2014, 15, 16. And even at that time, in 2016, when the first Trump administration took place, Secretary Pompeo at that time also alerted Georgian government not to give it to the Chinese. But in opposition or in contradiction with the American interest, Georgian government gave it to the Chinese. Another component is that besides this port project, we see significant amount of Chinese money being deployed through different kleptocratic or corrupting means. For example, Chinese companies are winning public tenders on building roads, tunnels, bridges, and directly or indirectly, all this is connected to the current Georgian government and their officials who enjoy this type of corrupt environment to engage with Chinese. We even saw Georgian government traveling to China, signing memorandum with Chinese Communist Party, praising the Chinese model of the governance as the model for Georgia, which is written in the document they signed with the Chinese Communist Party. But on top of it, while we have China through that economic or other means exploiting the corrupt fertile ground that was created again together with the Georgian Dream and Russian partnership, we have a Georgian government also causing up with Iranian government. We saw Georgian prime minister sitting in all different occasions with Iranian government, where in the audience was chanting "Death to America, death to Israel," and these videos are available in social media. So it is to broaden the context, the current Georgian government is Russian project, and they serve Russia's strategic interests, and they dictate how Georgian government will decide the alignment of Georgia against the West, with Iran, with China. So this type of context also indicates the importance of Georgia for authoritarian neighbors in our region. But on the other hand, also we clearly understand that this type of heavyweight pressure and attempt to take control on this middle corridor will be impossible for us to counter only just protesting on the street. We need a Western strategic interest to be vocally voiced, and also policy decisions that will be followed up by particular actions in our region.
So traditionally, support for Georgia was a very bipartisan matter. Is it still? Do you get support now from a kind of broad spectrum of members of Congress?
Yes, that always has been our policy, and that's why we call Georgian-American partnership strategic partnership, which unfortunately, but Russian and Georgian Dream government successfully torpedoed and obstructed in the last several years. That it was not part of any internal political debate in the US. It was bipartisan, and we always enjoyed that bipartisan support in the last 30 years since we regained independence from Soviet Union. And one of the best demonstration of this fact is the resolutions that are introduced in the both chambers of the U.S. Senate. For example, the Megobari Act, which is a legislation introduced by a bipartisan team in the House, and now the Senate reintroduced it, and it has almost 50 U.S. senators from both parties supporting, which advocates maintaining strategic partnership with Georgia while through coercion and sanctions preventing Georgian Dream and Russia to hijack Georgia state or capture Georgia state. And this bipartisan support never diminished, just the opposite. On every iteration or every new issue that popped up in our bilateral partnership, whether it was economy, trade, military, defense and security, or people to people, on every component we had a strong bipartisan support. This was the reason why Georgians were so actively deploying the biggest amount of troops when United States was needing in different parts of the world. That's why Georgia was one of the biggest per capita receiver of defense and security assistance from United States. And the Georgian military and the US militaries have that strong strategic partnership. So there is a big avenue. This legislation that has been introduced recently covers all those components. And these are the opportunities that US and Georgia will both have a mutually benefit of if we will be successfully pushing out and squeezing out peacefully Georgian dream from the position where they can obstruct Georgia's democratic transformation.
Okay, well, I hope that that proves to be true. This is a turbulent time, not just for Georgia, but for the United States as well. But I think that connection to a democratic Georgia remains very important for Americans. So let's hope that partnership continues. So Batu Kutelia, thank you very much for that explanation. Best of luck, and let's hope for the best in terms of the geopolitics of the Caucasus region.
Thank you. And I'm a strong believer that democracy will prevail in Georgia and everywhere in our part of the region. But the examples are important, and I think we will be setting this example together with the US and our strategic partnership.
Okay, very good.